How's it going, guys? So today I'm going to be doing a video on the differences between amateur boxing and professional boxing. We're looking at a stylistic front, how stylistically the different sport, well, I would almost call them different sports, but the differences between amateur and professional boxing. Of course, they're quite generalized. You can be a successful amateur with a professional style and vice versa. I'm also going to talk about the different experiences that I've had as an amateur and a professional boxer. I've been an amateur boxer for 6 years and a professional boxer for 5 years. So over roughly around 33 fights, I feel like I've got a decent level of experience to share with you guys. And also the differences in preparing for fights as well, the differences in the lifestyle. You might be an amateur boxer now, looking to turn professional. It might not suit you. You might need to wait for the right time. So I'm going to try and give you a bit of advice and explain the differences between the two. So firstly, starting off with amateur boxing. Amateur boxing is through the ABA, the Amateur Boxing Association. You have lots of different, let's say, organisations now. You've got the white collar, the Quest stuff. I didn't do that personally. I know, for instance, that the British Boxing Board of Control like you to do amateur boxing, the ABA style, because it's kind of the more traditional route, and personally, I prefer it. So the ABA's, the Amateur Boxing Association, you're going to be boxing 3 rounds. You can start boxing when you're 11, and when you first start boxing, if you're a young kid and you're not really sure you want to do it, you'll start off by having what they call skills bouts. Now, a skills bout is where you do 3 1-minute rounds, and this is normally for the younger kids, and there'll be no winner. You don't necessarily go hard. It's more like a sparring session in front of a crowd, just to get you used to the environment. But once you start fighting, you'll start with 90-second rounds, depending on your age, 2-minute rounds, and then eventually 3 3-minute rounds. But amateur boxing never goes over 3 3-minute rounds. Now, this is important, but because of this, it's going to affect your style. You very rarely see many knockouts in amateur boxing because you've only got 6 or 9 minutes to get your opponent out of there. So typically, it's more catered to a point scoring style. So what I mean by that is it kind of favours your taller fighters and your more agile fighters who box on the back foot and use their movement, and they score points. It's more of a point scoring system. So you want to win on points, you want to outpoint your opponent. The art of that is to hit and not get hit. So I found personally, my style always suited the professional style more. I was always quite aggressive. I would work the body, which doesn't really have that much significance in amateur boxing from my experiences. And I would wear fighters down. So by the 3rd round, lots of my opponents would be blowing and I'd just get going, but the fight would be over. So typically on the whole, your amateur style is going to suit boxers that are in and out, picking their shots at long range, giving plenty of movement, hitting and not getting hit. Whereas professional boxing goes from anywhere from 4 rounds to 12 rounds. So that's a lot longer. And I found personally, I much preferred professional boxing. You have your fighters like your Rocky Marcianos, your Julio Cesar Chavez. With a style that they had, it wouldn't necessarily suit the amateurs, but they were able to wear their opponents down. You kind of plant your feet more, and you definitely slow down a lot more and take your time in professional boxing. You use more feints and setups, and you can kind of spend maybe even 4 rounds setting an opponent up with a shot. If you can see they're dropping their right hand every time you feint to the body, then you can just keep setting them up. Subconsciously, they'll fall into that trap, and you can take your time to land your traps, to set up your traps and land your punches. So that's one of the biggest differences I found. It's a lot more brutal as a professional boxer. It's a lot slower pace, more wearing people down, whereas it's more of a point scoring system generally in the amateurs. But of course, that is I'm just generalizing. There are some professionals, some amateurs that have an incredibly effective professional style. You look at Mike Tyson, for instance, he was knocking out everyone in the amateurs. But generally, you'll normally find it's more of a point scoring system. Now, moving on. In the amateurs, you still have the 10-ounce gloves, which you'll wear in your fights. As a professional, if you're welterweight or under, that's 147 pounds, 10 stone 6, and under, you're going to be wearing 8-ounce gloves. Now, this is the main difference I found between amateur and professional boxing. The wraps and the gloves are completely different. When you're an amateur, you just put on your normal bandages that you wear in the gym. When you're a professional, it takes like 10 minutes to wrap your hands. Your coach will put gauze, tape, bandages all around, and in your knuckles they kind of even come out to here. And the biggest difference I found is the gloves. Professional boxing gloves are brutal, especially the 8 ounces. When you'll find with amateur gloves, the padding's more in the knuckles. In professional boxing, the weight is in the wrist. The knuckles, you can literally feel them when you're hitting your knuckles together in the changing room. So it's a lot more of a brutal sport. You'll see, I found personally, there's a lot more cuts in professional boxing. I had 8 fights as a professional. I had roughly around 26 as an amateur. I never cut an amateur opponent. In those 8 fights, I cut 3 of my opponents, and 2 of them quite badly, just because every time you're impacting, just using your jab, it's tearing the skin here. So professional boxing is a lot more brutal. The gloves are a lot smaller. Also, it's the obvious ones. Amateur boxing's changed a little bit from when I was doing it. I always wore a head guard. Now senior amateur boxers don't wear a head guard, but you always wear the vest. The vest is off when you're a professional boxer. And although it sounds minor, it does feel weird. I remember my pro debut going in with my shirt off. You take your top off after the ring walk and you do feel a little bit strange. It takes a little bit of getting used to. A few different things as well, like the ropes. The ropes can burn your shoulders when you've got no shirt on. I normally find when I have a fight, my shoulders are really bruised, and that never really happens in sparring. So that's another difference to get used to. And kind of going into the lifestyle now. Personally, I much prefer being a professional boxer. You'll hear lots of professional boxers saying that they go into a training camp. Now, what a training camp will be is roughly a 4 to 12 week intense camp where they would just purely focus on training. Outside of their camp, they might not train. Personally, as a professional, I trained all year round. So we would train at the Boxing Booth gym 6 days a week, all year round. But when we had a fight coming up, we would go into a camp per se of 8 to 9 weeks, but we would still do the same routine. We would just add evening sessions. So instead of training 6 times a week, we would train 10 times a week. Whereas when you're an amateur boxer, it's an all year round schedule. The notice on fights is completely different. As an amateur, you might prepare for a competition and have a month or 2 to prepare for a competition, almost like a camp. But typically I found, especially when you're just starting off and having fights, you will get fights on a lot more shorter notice. And you will also have to keep your weight down a lot more over a longer period of time as an amateur. So if you're entering a competition at 60 kilos, you'll have to weigh in for each fight, I believe, at 60 kilos. When I was in the ABAs and the CYPs, every time you progress, you have to weigh in on the day. Whereas when you're a professional, you do a day before weigh in and you're able to completely rehydrate and blow up. Now, what that means is amateurs tend to not cut as much weight because they have to maintain it over a longer period of time. Whereas professionals will drop a much more drastic amount of weight because they're able to just rehydrate the next day. Personally, and don't get me wrong as well, in professional boxing, you get lots of fights fall through. You also get lots of late call-ups. So it's always worth keeping your weight down as a professional. But typically, on the whole, as an amateur, you're going to have to keep your weight down a lot more, and you're going to have much more shorter notice fights. Not necessarily the same amount of time to prepare. And you're going to be a lot more active as an amateur boxer. I mean, when it comes to professional boxing, another difference between the two is professional boxing is a business. It's all about the money. So what that means is every time you fight, you have to make a certain amount of money selling tickets. Whereas amateur boxing, you just need to turn up and fight. It really doesn't matter if you win or lose. It's all about the experience, unless you're in a major competition, of course. Whereas professional boxing, you have to sell tickets, you have to promote the fights, even to the normal small hall level. More especially so, because if you can't sell enough tickets, then you have to pay out your own money. It actually costs you to fight as a professional in some instances if you don't sell enough tickets. So as an amateur, you're going to be much busier because you're not worrying about money, you're not worrying about tickets. And amateur boxing is kind of designed to kind of work in as apprenticeship almost for your professional boxing career. So you're going to be really busy, much busier than when you're a professional, which has its upsides and its downsides. But yeah, and also going into the busyness, going into your workload, your schedule as an amateur boxer, one of the reasons it kind of acts as an apprenticeship is because you're going to face a lot of different styles. Now, if you're fighting, I don't know, some guys have 50, 60, 70, 100, 200 amateur fights. You're going to face 200 different styles. Even if they're roughly the same, everyone has their different nuances. And that will stand you in really good stead when you're going to turn professional. When you turn professional, you've got an allotted period of time to train for one person, but all of that experience from being an amateur boxing will seep in, because you will be able to have that experience and that know-how to work out how to defeat that one style. And now I'll go into my last point really. One of the big questions I get is from lots of young amateur boxers who are really keen to turn professional. It's one of the reason I make these videos, because I was the same. And I didn't really have any information when I did want to turn professional. I had to kind of learn it all as I went. When is the right time to turn professional? Now, this really does vary. Personally, I turned professional at 21 years old. I never really enjoyed amateur boxing, and I had more success with my training as a professional boxer. But 21 is still quite young. I believe, off the top of my head, you can turn pro from 18 in the UK as a professional. It might vary in other countries, I'm not entirely sure. But in the UK, once you turn 18, you can turn professional. I would really wait until you're ready. And I know that sounds like I'm not really giving you an answer, but the amateurs can be such a great way to build your profile and build yourself up into a marketable asset for a promoter. So for me, for instance, I wish I had more amateur fights. I'm glad I turned pro when I did, but I had 26 amateur fights. Had I have had 50 amateur fights and I'd won a couple of major tournaments, I might have been spotted by a major promoter. Now, the better you do as an amateur, basically, the more chance you've got of being picked up by a promoter. Now, when you turn professional without a major promoter, which I would say 85% of professional boxers do, it all relies on you. You have to promote everything, and it's a lot of extra work, and it doesn't pay very well until you do get that big break with a promoter. So I would say do as well as you can do, win your tournaments, have as many fights as you can, and also wait until you're physically ready too. You don't necessarily need to. You have a few years of fighting your journeyman to get you physically ready, but you know, there really is no rush. If you're you know, building up a good amateur record, then take your time, wait till you're ready, and do the best you can. It will stand you in good stead for when you do turn professional and you are able to have that backing behind you. That's really important. So yeah, those are just a few pointers, a few of the differences that I've found in my experience between amateur boxing and professional boxing. Like I say, personally, I really much prefer professional boxing. But I think amateur boxing is great, and I think most boxers should go through the amateur schooling system. If you are watching this video and you're not a boxer and you would like to start boxing, I get lots of people asking me that. How do I start boxing? It's really simple. Just go to your local gym. It really is simple. Go to the local gym, just type on Google local boxing clubs, and you'll find out pretty quickly whether they're amateur, white collar. It really doesn't matter where you go, but just have that introduction to boxing, see how you get on, and then just talk to the guys at the gym. Most of them will be able to get you fighting soon, and if it's a good gym, they'll look after you too. So that's all for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. If you like the content, make sure you comment, like, and subscribe. I really appreciate all of the support helping growing the page, and thank you very much. Let me know what you want to see in future videos. Just drop a comment in the comment section below, and I'll see you